The notification arrived at 6:17 a.m. while I stood barefoot in my Pennsylvania garden, morning dew soaking through my socks. My phone buzzed against the wooden fence post where I'd set it down moments earlier. I was holding a hose in one hand, watering the tomato plants I'd started from seed 3 months earlier. The mist was just lifting off the fields behind my property, revealing the rolling hills I'd bought with my first real paycheck 15 years ago. Those hills represented everything I'd worked for: stability, independence, a place where I could think clearly away from boardrooms and investor calls. I set down the hose, wiped my hands on my jeans, and picked up the phone. DocuSign notification. The subject line read, "Unanimous written consent. Removal of Harlan Whitby as director, officer, and authorized signer of North Forge Systems Incorporated effective immediately." I read it twice, letting each word register. My heart rate didn't change. My hands didn't shake. I'd been expecting this for 8 months, ever since I'd noticed the pattern of private meetings I wasn't invited to and the strategic conversations that suddenly went quiet when I entered rooms. I set the phone back down and finished watering the tomatoes. The morning was too beautiful to waste on panic. Inside my chest, though, something clicked into place like a locked tumbler finding its position. A plan I'd built carefully, quietly, over 2 years was about to begin. I walked inside and made coffee. Black, no sugar, same ceramic mug I'd used since college when Tamsin and I had met in an entrepreneurship class at Penn State. The kitchen was quiet except for the gurgle of the coffee maker and the distant sound of birds outside my window. I didn't call anyone. Didn't text. Didn't send angry emails or demand explanations from board members who'd once called me a visionary. Instead, I opened my laptop and navigated to a folder I'd created 18 months earlier, back when I'd first suspected that my marriage and my company were both heading toward betrayal. The folder was labeled Red Map, buried 3 levels deep in my personal files, password protected and backed up in 4 different locations, including an encrypted cloud service and a physical hard drive in my safe deposit box. Inside were documents, spreadsheets, legal opinions from 3 different law firms, patent filings, corporate governance analyses, and a detailed timeline I'd been updating every single week. Page 1 outlined the exact scenario I was now living through. Page 19 contained a single sentence that had taken me 6 months and $47,000 in legal fees to construct properly. In the event of removal without cause, minority shareholder protections under Section 7.3b of the amended bylaws shall trigger automatic governance review and temporary freeze on major corporate actions pending resolution. My face remained calm as I read through the documents. My coffee grew cold in the mug. The plan had never depended on emotion. It depended on structure, documentation, and patience. At 7:02 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it was my attorney, Rutger Vance, a corporate lawyer specializing in founder disputes and governance conflicts. I'd retained him quietly 13 months earlier, paying his retainer from a personal account Tamsin had never known about. His text was brief and professional. Morning check-in. Assume nothing has changed since our last discussion regarding potential removal scenarios? I typed 3 words. Everything has changed. No explanation. No dramatic details. No emotion. Just facts. Within 90 seconds he replied, "Send the DocuSign immediately. Do not respond to any communications from North Forge until we speak. I'm clearing my morning." I forwarded the removal notification and the full document package. Then I poured my cold coffee down the sink, made a fresh cup, and sat on my back porch watching the sun climb higher. The morning light was turning the fields golden. My phone stayed silent for exactly 11 minutes. When Rutger called back, his voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of urgency I rarely heard from him. "Harlan, this is actually cleaner than we thought it would be. They didn't follow proper notice procedures under Section 4.7. They didn't document adequate cause. They didn't provide the mandatory 14-day review period for minority shareholders. We have multiple angles of attack here. I listened without interrupting, letting him work through the legal analysis. When he finished, I said only, "Proceed exactly as we planned. No deviations." The call ended. I went back to my garden and spent the next hour pulling weeds from the vegetable beds, methodically and thoroughly. At 9:14 a.m., my wife sent me a text message. Not a call. Not an apology. Not even a brief explanation. A photograph. The image showed Tamsin sitting at the head of the North Forge boardroom table, champagne glass raised high, surrounded by 4 board members I'd personally recruited 7 years earlier when we were raising our Series C funding. People I trusted. People who'd told me I was building something revolutionary. Her smile was wide, confident, victorious. The smile of someone who believed she'd won completely. The caption read, "House cleaned. You are holding us back, Harlan. Time for real leadership to move this company forward." I took a screenshot, my movements deliberate and practiced. Saved it to my phone, my laptop, and 2 separate cloud storage accounts. Then she sent a second message, and this one carried more venom. "Leland knows how to execute. You only knew how to hesitate and second-guess every decision." Leland Farrow. Her new partner, both romantically and professionally. The CEO of our biggest competitor, Arroyo Innovations, a company we'd been battling for market share for 6 years. I'd suspected their relationship for 11 months, ever since I'd noticed her taking calls outside and smiling at her phone in ways she hadn't smiled at me in years. I'd confirmed it 8 months ago through credit card statements showing hotel charges and restaurant bills on nights she'd claimed to be at industry conferences. And I'd documented it all carefully, methodically, knowing that someday it would matter. I didn't respond to either message. I simply added the screenshots to a folder labeled evidence/timeline and noted the timestamp with precision. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. The machine I'd built needed cold execution, not hot rage. By midday, Bloomberg had picked up the story. The headline scrolled across my phone screen. "Leadership shakeup at North Forge Systems. Founder Harlan Whitby out as board removes director amid strategic pivot toward aggressive growth." The article quoted Tamsin extensively, and I could hear her voice in every carefully crafted sentence. "North Forge is entering a decisive new era. We're moving from cautious incrementalism to bold execution. This change reflects our commitment to shareholders and our vision for industry leadership. Sometimes founding vision needs to give way to operational excellence." The comments section filled quickly with speculation. Industry insiders debated whether I'd been pushed out or had stepped down voluntarily. Former colleagues sent carefully worded messages asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, if we could talk. I ignored them all, every single one. Instead, I drove 20 minutes to a storage facility outside town, one I'd rented under a business entity Tamsin had never known about, registered in Delaware under a name that wouldn't appear in any casual search. Inside Unit 347, in a fireproof safe bolted to the concrete floor, sat a 3-inch binder labeled IP Trust, sealed documentation. I removed it carefully, locked the unit, and drove home through back roads, taking my time, thinking through the next steps. Inside the binder were patent assignments, trust formation documents, licensing agreements, and legal opinions that North Forge lawyers were about to discover they'd completely overlooked. The company's flagship product line, responsible for 63% of revenue, depended on 3 core patents. 2 belonged to North Forge. The third, the most critical one covering the foundational algorithm, belonged to a trust I'd created 6 years earlier when we were still private and I still controlled the board. At 2:47 p.m., my email inbox erupted like a disturbed hornet's nest. The first message came from North Forge General Counsel, a lawyer named Demetrius Hale who joined the company 3 years ago. "Urgent, Board requests immediate call regarding transition logistics and knowledge transfer protocols. I read it carefully, then replied with a single sentence citing Section 12.4 of the company bylaws, which required 72 hours written notice for any mandatory board participation by removed directors. No argument. No emotion. No explanation. Just procedure, clean and unambiguous. 5 minutes later, their outside counsel, a partner at Caldwell and Morris who billed $950 an hour and had guided us through our IPO, sent a more carefully worded message. Harlan, we recognize emotions may be running high during this transition period. We'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss transition terms that respect your significant contributions while facilitating smooth operational continuity. I replied. All communications regarding my removal should proceed through my counsel, Rutger Vance, effective immediately. I included his contact information and blind copied Rutger on the response. Then I changed into work clothes and went outside to fix a section of fence that had been sagging for 2 weeks. The physical work felt good after hours of stillness. Hammer, nails, post-hole digger, sweat, tangible progress. By the time I finished, my shirt was soaked and 3 more urgent emails had arrived from North Forge. I didn't read any of them. The fence was fixed. That mattered. Everything else was proceeding according to structure. That evening, Tamsin posted on LinkedIn, her first public comment since the announcement. The photograph showed her and Leland at an upscale steakhouse downtown, candlelight reflecting off champagne flutes and expensive watches that caught the light perfectly. She was wearing the diamond necklace I bought her for our 10th anniversary, back when we were still partners in every sense of the word. He had his arm around her shoulders possessively, the gesture of someone marking territory. The caption read, "Celebrating bold new beginnings. North Forge future has never been brighter. Grateful for partners who share the vision and the courage to execute it. #leadership, #innovation, #new chapter, #execution matters." The post received 847 likes within an hour. Former employees congratulated her on her courage. Industry analysts praised the strategic direction. One commenter wrote, "Tough decisions make great companies. This is what real leadership looks like. Respect." Another added, "Sometimes you need to cut dead weight to move forward." While they were ordering dessert, while Tamsin was basking in congratulations and Leland was probably planning how to acquire North Forge at a discount, I was at my kitchen table, electronically filing a minority shareholder objection through my attorney that triggered an automatic 14-day freeze on any merger discussions, board composition changes, or major asset transfers. The filing was procedural, technical, deliberately boring. It cited bylaws, corporate governance standards, Delaware corporate law, and fiduciary duty requirements. It contained no emotion, no accusations, no personal grievances. Just law, structure, and proper process. The notification hit North Forge's registered agent at 8:43 p.m., right about when their creme brulee would have arrived at the table. My phone started ringing at 8:51 p.m., 8 minutes after the filing hit their system. First Tamsin, her name lighting up my screen. Then the general counsel. Then 2 board members in rapid succession. Then Leland Farrow himself, which surprised me slightly. I let every single call go to voicemail, watching the screen light up and fade, over and over. I finished washing my dinner dishes, dried them carefully with a towel my mother had given me years ago, and put them away in their proper places. Only then did I pour a glass of water, sit down at my kitchen table, and listen to the messages they'd left. Tamsin's voice was tight, controlled, vibrating with barely suppressed fury. "What the hell did you just file, Harlan? This is insane. You can't do this. Call me immediately. We need to talk about this like adults." The general counsel sounded genuinely confused and slightly panicked. "Harlan, we've received notice of a governance objection and asset freeze. This appears to be based on a misunderstanding of the removal process. Please call so we can clarify the situation and resolve this quickly. The board members alternated between conciliatory and irritated, their voices revealing how unprepared they were for any resistance. Leland's message was the most revealing of all, and I played it twice. Listen, Whitby, whatever game you think you're playing ends now. You're out. You lost. Accept it and move on with your life. Don't make this ugly. I saved all 5 messages, backed them up to 3 different locations, and documented the timestamps with precision. Then I went to bed. I slept 7 hours without interruption, without dreams, without anxiety. Panic, I'd learned over 2 years of preparation, sounds very different when you're the prepared one. The next morning, Rutger called at 6:30 a.m., which meant he'd been working since well before dawn analyzing the situation. Harlan, their counsel left me a voicemail at 11 last night. I'm reading the transcript now. Direct quote, "We may have moved faster than ideal on the removal process and appeared to have overlooked certain minority protection provisions that may be applicable." Those are their exact words, verbatim. They're already backing down. I asked the only question that mattered. Can they reverse the freeze without our consent? He laughed, which he rarely did in professional contexts. Not without your explicit written consent or a court order, which would take months to obtain and require them to prove the freeze is frivolous and harmful. It's either. You structured this perfectly. Every clause, every protection, every trigger mechanism. This is the cleanest founder protection structure I've seen in 15 years of practice. Within an hour, my trust, Whitby Holdings IP Trust, established in 2018 and registered in Delaware with me as sole trustee, filed formal notice to North Forge Systems Incorporated. The notice was professional, clear, and absolutely devastating to their plans. It informed the company that patent number 11,247,853, which covered the core algorithm in North Forge's primary revenue product line, was not owned by North Forge Systems Incorporated. It was licensed to North Forge under terms that explicitly prohibited transfer, sale, merger, or any change of control without the patent holder's prior written consent. The patent holder was my trust. I was the sole trustee with exclusive authority. And I had not consented to anything. By afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond anything Tamsin could control. North Forge's rushed removal process had triggered an automatic independent governance audit under NASDAQ listing requirements. When you remove a founder director without proper cause and then immediately freeze major corporate actions within 24 hours, regulators and exchanges noticed these things. The auditor, a former federal prosecutor named Wilhelmina Cross who specialized in corporate governance and had built a reputation for thoroughness, requested extensive documentation, all board minutes from the past 18 months, all written communications between directors regarding my removal, all financial projections related to potential mergers or strategic partnerships, and all documentation of due diligence performed before the removal vote. North Forge had to comply. Corporate bylaws, securities regulations, and NASDAQ requirements left them absolutely no choice. Tamsin handed over everything, apparently confident the records would support her narrative of decisive leadership, replacing cautious hesitation and analytical paralysis. She didn't realize what those records revealed when examined by someone who knew what to look for. By the following morning, 2 board members had quietly submitted their resignations. The official reason was scheduling conflicts and competing time commitments requiring immediate attention. The real reason, which I learned through industry contacts, was that they'd read the auditor's preliminary questions and realize they'd approved my removal based on incomplete information, potential conflicts of interest, and pressure from Tamsin that might constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. The trade press picked up the governance story within 72 hours, and it spread like wildfire through tech media. TechCrunch ran the headline: North Forge Systems faces governance turmoil following founder's ouster. The article quoted unnamed sources describing rushed decision-making, potential procedural irregularities, and questions about proper process. Buried in paragraph 7 was the most damaging detail, leaked directly from someone with access to the audit process. Board text messages showed Tamsin had pressured directors to move fast and clean, and lock this down before Harlan can create complications we'll regret. Those were her exact words, now part of an official governance review being conducted by a former prosecutor. I didn't leak anything. I didn't need to. The process was doing the work for me, exactly as I'd designed it to do. Former colleagues started reaching out privately, carefully, testing the waters to see which side would prevail. Harlan, I'm seeing some concerning reports about the removal process. Want to grab coffee sometime and talk about what really happened? I declined politely, professionally, without burning bridges. This wasn't about personal vindication or rebuilding alliances or gathering supporters. It was about structure, process, documentation, and letting consequences flow naturally from actions. The machine I built over 2 years was running exactly as designed, and it needed no additional fuel from me. Within a week, the entire industry was watching closely. Every major tech publication ran some version of the North Forge governance crisis story. Industry analysts questioned whether the merger with Arroyo could proceed given the patent complications and governance review. Investors grew nervous about leadership stability and legal exposure. The stock price dropped 11% over 3 trading days, erasing roughly $140 million in market capitalization. Leland realized, probably for the first time, that he couldn't close a merger or acquisition without resolving the patent licensing issue I'd created. The patent my trust controlled wasn't peripheral or optional or something that could be engineered around quickly. It was absolutely foundational to how North Forge's products functioned. Without it, North Forge's flagship product became legally vulnerable to infringement claims, and Arroyo's acquisition value dropped by potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. A former North Forge engineer, someone I'd hired personally in 2016 and mentored through 3 promotions, sent me a private message. You structured those patents separately on purpose years ago, didn't you? Before any of this started. Before anyone knew there would be problems. You were protecting the company from exactly this kind of situation. I replied with 3 carefully chosen words. Proper corporate hygiene. He understood immediately. So, eventually, would everyone else who dismissed me as overly cautious. The lesson wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about preparation, foresight, and building protections into foundations that couldn't be removed without consequences. On day 9 after my removal, Tamsin broke her public silence directly. The email arrived at 4:17 a.m., which meant she'd been awake all night wrestling with the situation. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk." The body was 3 short sentences. Harlan, this has gotten out of hand. We can negotiate reasonable terms that work for everyone. Please call me so we can resolve this professionally. I forwarded the email to Rutger without any comment or instruction. He replied within minutes despite the early hour. Do not engage directly under any circumstances. All communication goes through me exclusively. They're in full crisis mode and getting desperate. I wrote back. Understood. Proceed with the plan exactly as outlined. There was no anger in my response, no satisfaction, no sense of victory. No emotion at all. Just the continuation of a process that had been set in motion long before Tamsin realized she needed to worry. I spent that morning replacing rotted boards on my barn roof, a job I'd been postponing for months. Rain was forecast for the afternoon, and the work needed finishing before the weather turned. Hammer, nails, tar paper, careful measurement, and physical labor that produced visible results. By the time I climbed down the ladder, my phone showed 6 missed calls. I didn't check who'd called or listened to any messages. The roof was fixed properly. That mattered. Everything else was proceeding according to structure, and structure didn't require my constant attention. 2 weeks after my removal, Northforge shareholders demanded a special meeting. 3 institutional investors, collectively controlling 22% of outstanding shares, filed formal requests citing governance concerns, leadership questions, and potential breach of fiduciary duty requiring immediate shareholder review. Under Delaware corporate law and the company's bylaws, the board had absolutely no choice but to schedule the meeting within 30 days. The agenda included one primary item: a vote on Tamsin's continued service as board chair and her fitness to lead during the current crisis. I didn't organize the shareholder revolt. I didn't lobby or campaign or make phone calls to institutional investors. I didn't need to. I'd simply structured my initial minority stake very carefully when we'd taken Northforge public 5 years earlier, ensuring certain protective rights that most founders surrendered in exchange for higher valuations and cleaner cap tables. Those rights included the ability to trigger governance reviews and shareholder votes under specific circumstances. Circumstances exactly like a rushed founder removal followed by immediate merger discussions with a direct competitor run by the removed founder's wife's romantic partner. The special meeting was scheduled for 21 days out. Tamsin had 3 weeks to hold her coalition together while the governance audit continued. The patent licensing issue remained unresolved, the stock price continued dropping, and the industry watched every development with intense interest. The pressure was immense, public, completely procedural, and relentless. One by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion, her supporters began to defect. It started with quiet conversations and carefully worded statements about needing time to review all relevant information and ensuring we followed proper process going forward. By week 3, 2 more board members had resigned, citing the same vague reasons. A third, one of our earliest investors, publicly questioned whether the removal had been premature and inadequately considered given the circumstances. The general counsel, Demetrius Hale, who'd been with Northforge since the Series B funding round and had helped build our legal infrastructure, gave his notice. He didn't cite specific reasons in his resignation letter, but everyone understood. The legal exposure from the rushed removal process was becoming clearer every day, and he didn't want his professional reputation attached to what was increasingly looking like a governance disaster. Tamsin called me directly on day 19, her number appearing on my screen while I was working in the garden. I saw her name on the caller ID and set the phone down on the fence post without answering. She called again 3 minutes later. Then again. Then again. 5 calls in 12 minutes, each one unanswered, each one documented. I was replacing a leaky seal on my tractor's hydraulic line, and the work required concentration and clean hands. By the time I finished the repair and washed the hydraulic fluid off my hands, she'd left 2 voicemails and sent 3 text messages. I didn't listen to the voicemails or read the texts. Whatever she had to say, she could say it through proper channels with attorneys present. The day before the special shareholder meeting, I spent the afternoon working on my barn. The west-facing wall needed new weatherproofing before winter arrived in earnest. Rain, nails, tar paper, measuring tape, level. Quiet, methodical physical work that produced visible, lasting results. I'd learned years ago that the best decisions come from a calm mind, and a calm mind comes from purposeful activity that has nothing to do with the crisis at hand. By sunset, the weatherproofing was complete. The barn was solid, ready for whatever winter would bring. At the same time, halfway across the state in a conference room I knew well, Northforge's board was meeting in emergency session. The governance audit had delivered its preliminary findings that afternoon, and according to a source who remained friendly to me, the results were damaging beyond what anyone had anticipated: inadequate notice procedures, potential conflicts of interest involving Tamsin and Leland, failure to properly evaluate alternatives to removal, rushed execution that suggested predetermined outcomes rather than deliberative process, and possible breach of fiduciary duty to minority shareholders. The report stopped short of making definitive legal conclusions, but the implications were absolutely clear to anyone who read it. The board had violated its own bylaws and potentially its fiduciary duties to shareholders. The special shareholder meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. the next morning. I laid out clean clothes, set my alarm for 6, made sure my truck had gas, and went to bed at 9. Whatever happened tomorrow would happen according to process, not emotion, and I'd done everything necessary to prepare. The vote wasn't even close. 73% of voting shares supported Tamsin's removal as board chair, a landslide that stunned observers who'd expected a closer contest. She retained her board seat under the company's staggered director structure, but lost all leadership authority, all committee assignments, and all influence over day-to-day operations. The board immediately invited me to return as technical advisor with full board observer status. I declined the offer publicly and clearly. North Forge needed stability and fresh leadership, not the appearance of a founder's revenge tour or a personality-driven power struggle. Instead, I recommended Idris Keating, a former CTO from one of our main competitors who'd retired 2 years earlier with an impeccable reputation and no personal stake in North Forge's internal politics. The board accepted the recommendation unanimously within 48 hours. North Forge survived the immediate crisis, but barely, and with significant damage. The Arroyo merger was officially dead. Leland had withdrawn his offer the previous week once the patent complications became fully clear and the governance crisis made any acquisition impossibly complex. The company's stock stabilized at 19% below its pre-crisis high, representing nearly $250 million in destroyed shareholder value. 3 senior executives left for competitors within a month. The narrative in tech media had shifted completely from bold new leadership to governance failure and recovery. And through all of it, through every phase of the crisis, I'd made no public statements, given no interviews to reporters, filed no lawsuits, and made no dramatic gestures. The structure I'd built had done absolutely everything. The personal consequences for Tamsin emerged slowly at first, then all at once like an avalanche. Within a month of her removal as chair, she lost 2 additional board seats at other companies where she'd served. Both cited scheduling conflicts in their press releases, but the real message was clear to everyone in the industry. Directors who led governance failures became toxic to other boards regardless of their other qualifications. The professional network she'd built so carefully over 15 years began to dissolve. Invitations to industry conferences stopped arriving in her inbox. Speaking opportunities dried up completely. Her LinkedIn posts, which had once generated hundreds of engaged comments and shares, now attracted mostly silence or brief, polite acknowledgments. Former allies stopped returning calls and emails. Professional contacts who'd once sought her advice suddenly became unavailable. 6 weeks after her removal, she sent me an email that was different from all the others. "Harlan, I need to talk to you in person. Not about business or North Forge. About understanding what happened and why. Please." I forwarded it to Rutger as I did with all communication from her, and he advised strongly against any meeting. I considered his advice carefully, then ignored it. Not because I wanted reconciliation or revenge or even closure in any traditional sense, but because clarity mattered and ambiguity would prevent both of us from moving forward. I suggested a quiet cafe halfway between her apartment in the city and my house in the country. Neutral ground. Public enough to prevent emotional escalation, private enough for honest conversation. We met on a Tuesday morning at a small coffee shop neither of us had been to before, a place with no memories attached. She arrived first, ordered herbal tea, and sat in the back corner away from the windows. I arrived exactly on time, ordered black coffee, and sat across from her at the small table. She looked tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. The confident boardroom executive was completely gone, replaced by someone who'd learned hard lessons about structure, consequence, and the difference between authority and power. "I never thought you'd fight back," she said quietly, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. "I thought you'd just accept it and move on." I sipped my coffee, taking my time before responding. "I didn't fight back. I just enforced agreements we both signed and structures we both agreed to when they benefited us." She shook her head slowly. "Don't be semantic, Harlan. You destroyed everything I built. Everything." "I enforce corporate governance," I replied calmly, without heat. "You destroyed it by moving recklessly without proper process. The consequences were procedural, not personal. Structure doesn't care about intentions." She wanted me to be angry, to yell, to confirm that this had all been about revenge for the affair or the betrayal, or the humiliation. I couldn't give her that satisfaction because it wasn't true. It had never been about revenge. It had been about preparation, documentation, proper structure, and letting consequences flow naturally from actions. We talked for 40 minutes, covering everything from when the marriage had started failing to when she'd first gotten involved with Leland to when she decided I needed to be removed from North Forge. I didn't apologize for anything, because I genuinely had nothing to apologize for. She didn't apologize either, which told me she still didn't fully understand what had happened or why. When we parted, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no anger, no closure. Just completion. A chapter had ended according to rules that had been established long before either of us realized we'd someday be enforcing them against each other. A year passed, and then another. North Forge stabilized under Idris Keating's steady leadership, but the company never regained its previous momentum or market enthusiasm. The governance crisis had damaged relationships with key clients who valued stability. 2 major contracts were lost to competitors during the transition period. The engineering team remained talented and capable but cautious, unwilling to take the kinds of calculated risks that had once defined the company's culture and driven innovation. The stock price recovered to within 12% of its pre-crisis high, then plateaued there for 18 months. Wall Street analysts described North Forge as solid but uninspiring, competent but not innovative, stable but lacking vision. The company I'd co-founded had survived, but something essential had been lost in the crisis. Meanwhile, I'd quietly launched something completely new. Northspire Technologies started in my barn with 3 engineers, all former North Forge employees who'd left during the chaos and reached out to me independently. We focused on industrial sensor systems for manufacturing applications, a niche market North Forge had always considered too small and specialized to pursue seriously. Our first product shipped 4 months after incorporation. Revenue in year 1, $2.7 million. Year 2, $11.3 million. Year 3, $34.8 million. We stayed private, stayed deliberately small, stayed absolutely disciplined about growth. No dramatic press releases. No ambitious expansion plans. No venture capital funding with its accompanying pressure and loss of control. Just excellent products, fair prices, reliable delivery, and sustainable growth. By year 3, something unexpected happened that I hadn't specifically planned for. Northspire's enterprise value, calculated by the private equity firms that had started approaching us, exceeded North Forge's public market capitalization. We were a fraction of the size measured by revenue or employees, but we were consistently profitable, completely debt-free, growing organically without artificial stimulation, and building real value. North Forge was public, overleveraged from an ill-advised acquisition attempt, and still struggling with the governance legacy that hung over every board decision like a shadow. A business reporter from Forbes who was writing a feature about founder transitions asked me during a rare interview I'd agreed to, "Was Northspire built as revenge against North Forge and your ex-wife?" I thought carefully before answering, knowing the quote would be scrutinized. No. Northspire was built because I understand how to structure companies properly for sustainable success. That knowledge didn't come from revenge or anger. It came from experience, including painful experience. The reporter pressed harder. But you must feel vindicated by North Spire's success and North Forge's struggles. I shook my head. Vindication implies I needed external validation to feel good about my decisions. I don't. The structures I built at North Forge were always sound. The crisis proved that structures and proper governance matter more than personalities or ambition. The article ran 2 weeks later with the headline, Harlan Whitby builds new empire on lessons from old one. It was accurate enough, though it missed the deeper truth. The real lesson wasn't about building empires or winning battles. It was about building foundations that couldn't be removed without consent and ensuring that consent mattered. Tamsin remained in professional limbo, a kind of corporate purgatory. She occasionally consulted for smaller companies that were unaware of her history or didn't care. She spoke at smaller, regional conferences that couldn't attract higher-profile speakers. She maintained an active LinkedIn presence that felt increasingly desperate to those who remembered her previous status. Her posts about leadership and innovation generated polite likes but little meaningful engagement or discussion. The industry had moved on to newer stories, fresher scandals, and different personalities. 5 years after the North Forge crisis, she published a LinkedIn article titled, Lessons from Failure, What I Learned About Governance the Hard Way. It was thoughtful, well-written, and surprisingly honest about her mistakes. She acknowledged moving too fast, failing to verify critical details, allowing personal relationships to cloud professional judgment, and fundamentally underestimating the importance of proper process and structure. The article generated significant engagement, mostly from people who appreciated the vulnerability and the hard-won wisdom. I read it carefully, multiple times, analyzing every sentence. She'd learned the right lessons, absorbed the right principles, and understood what had gone wrong. But she'd learned them too late for the knowledge to matter professionally. Her career had plateaued at a level far below where it had been before the crisis, and there was no path back up. That wasn't cruelty on anyone's part. It was just a consequence, the natural result of actions and choices. Markets, boards, investors, and professional networks have very long memories for governance failures. I didn't comment on the article. I didn't share it or endorse it or send her a private message acknowledging it. Her learning journey was hers to complete, and my participation wasn't necessary or helpful. One autumn evening, 7 years after my removal from North Forge, I drove to the industrial park where Tamsin and I had started the company in a cramped, overheated space. The original building still stood, though it housed a different tenant now, a logistics company that had no idea of the building's history. The parking lot where we'd worked through countless all-nighters was cracked and fading, weeds pushing through the asphalt. The loading dock where we'd personally shipped our first product to our first customer was rusty and clearly unused. I parked my truck and walked slowly around the building's perimeter, letting memories surface. The memories were clear but distant, like watching a film about someone else's life through thick glass. We'd been young here. Hungry. Driven. United by shared vision and mutual respect, and the intoxicating belief that we were building something that mattered. The deterioration of our partnership hadn't been sudden or dramatic. It had been gradual, almost invisible, day to day, until suddenly it wasn't gradual anymore and everything fell apart at once. I pulled a folded paper from my jacket pocket, carefully preserved. It was a printout of the first email Tamsin had sent after my removal, the one with the boardroom photograph and the caption about cleaning house and moving forward with real leadership. I'd carried it for 7 years, not as a wound I couldn't heal but as a reminder of what mattered. Structure matters. Preparation matters. Documentation matters. Emotion fades, but proper process endures. Behind the old building, in what had once been a neglected corner of the parking lot where we'd never bothered to pave, I knelt and used my hands to dig a small hole in the dirt. The ground was harder than I expected, rocky and resistant, reluctant to yield. It took almost 10 minutes of steady work to create a depression deep enough for what I intended. From my truck, I retrieved a young oak sapling I'd bought that morning from a local nursery, its roots carefully wrapped in burlap. I planted it with care, filling the hole with a mixture of the existing soil and the nutrient-rich planting mix I'd brought. Trees grow slowly, steadily, patiently. They require consistent care, proper foundation, and time measured in decades rather than quarters. They don't care about quarterly earnings reports or stock prices or board politics or who won which battle. They just grow, if you give them what they need and don't interfere with natural processes. I watered the sapling thoroughly from a gallon jug I'd brought, using the entire contents, soaking the ground completely. Then I took the printed email, unfolded it one last time, and read Tamsin's words in the fading afternoon light. House cleaned. You were holding us back. I placed the paper carefully in the dirt beside the tree and covered it gently with soil, pressing it down firmly. Symbolic, maybe even slightly theatrical, but meaningful to me in ways I didn't need to justify. The document that had started everything was now buried, its ink slowly dissolving, its paper gradually breaking down, becoming part of the foundation for something new that would outlast all of us. I stood slowly and brushed dirt from my hands, watching it fall away. The sun was setting behind the old building, casting long shadows across the parking lot where so much had begun. In my truck, my phone buzzed with a notification I'd been expecting. North Spire had just closed our largest contract ever, a 7-year agreement with a Fortune 100 manufacturer worth $127 million. The deal had taken 18 months to negotiate, required extensive technical validation and reference checking, and represented exactly the kind of patient, structural work that defined everything we built. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone or post on social media or send congratulatory emails. I just acknowledged the notification, filed it mentally, and drove home through country roads as darkness fell. That evening, I made a simple dinner, ate alone on my porch, and watched the stars emerge one by one in the clear sky. Somewhere across the state, Tamsin was living whatever life she'd managed to build from the consequences of her choices. I held no anger toward her anymore, no satisfaction in her professional struggles, no need for continued vindication or proof that I'd been right. She tried to erase me from something we built together, removing me completely in a single decisive action. That removal had been immediate, public, confident, and celebrated. But my response hadn't been immediate, or emotional or reactive. It had been structural, patient, built on foundations laid years before the crisis arrived. And the strength that grew from proper structure, from careful preparation, from patient documentation, from respecting process, that strength wasn't visible in a single day or week or month. It compounded slowly, like interest, like root systems, like properly built trust. Her removal of me was immediate and final. My becoming stronger began the same morning, with a phone notification, a garden hose, and a plan that had always been there, waiting quietly for the moment it would be needed. The oak sapling would grow slowly over decades, outlasting both of us. So would the lessons I'd learned. Not because of revenge, but because I'd built foundations that couldn't be removed without consequences, and I'd understood that truth long before she did.